Hello, everyone. Today I would like to talk to you about the remote ID proposal from the FAA and share with you my suggestions for how to respond. All right, so as you know, back at the end of December, the FAA released their proposal for what they want to be remote ID. And while you're watching this, I'm going to hopefully find some nice flight footage, stick it in the background so you can watch that and relax while you're stressing out to me reading these remote ID NPRM suggestions. So, as part of my work with the FPV Freedom Coalition, I created this website guide for how to respond to the remote ID NPRM. And the first thing that you need to know is that the deadline for your submitting your response is March 2nd, 2020. The FAA, I think by law, had to give all of us 60 days for us to formulate our comments. And even though multiple organizations asked the FAA to extend that deadline, and that the FAA has extended deadlines on things like this in the past, they actually responded to all of those organizations with a no. No, we are not going to extend the deadline because we want to get this done as soon as possible. So unfortunately, that just means we've got not a whole lot of time, and you need to get your comments done and submitted to the FAA by March 2nd. And I would actually suggest that you try to get them in maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks ahead of that deadline, just in case there's any glitches, technical problems, or whatever that might get in the way if you waited till the last minute. Always a good idea to be prepared. So another suggestion I have is that you create your comment as a document. Say use Microsoft Word or Google Doc or whatever text file on your computer or on your phone you would like to use. But because the website that you can use for commenting, the form on that page doesn't allow you to fill it with a whole lot of text, but they do allow you to have up to 10 megabyte attachments, and they can be in all kinds of different formats, whether they're JPEGs or other images, Word documents, PDFs, text files. I just sort of think that it would work out the best if you edited a text document and uploaded that text document, say in a PDF. That way you are not limited by the form on the website, and it helps for creating your draft and working on it over time, and you won't lose it in case you happen to accidentally close your web browser or something like that. So I strongly suggest that you create a document and you attach the document as your response. Next up here, I suggest that you do your research. If at all possible, try to read the entire Remote ID NPRM. I know it's over 300 and some pages long if it was a PDF, but it is something that you should do if you care about this and if you want to submit the best comment you possibly can. But I also know that a lot of people are not going to read all 300 and some pages. Or if you do, you might skim over it and you would like some sort of a primer. So before you do that, go ahead and check out some of the other resources we have on the FPV Freedom Coalition website. We've got a Remote ID NPRM FAQ. We have a guide to what's in the document. We have a talking points document that sort of covers all of the major issues that the FPVFC sees that are in the document. There's a bunch of requests within the NPRM where the FAA is specifically requesting that you comment on these things. I think there's about 12 of those. So the FPV Freedom Coalition also has a document going over those 12 and what the FPVFC's responses are to those. And there's also all kinds of other resources out there, like Brendan Schulman from DJI. He has a blog post on remote ID, which does a great job covering what DJI sees as some of the biggest concerns with this proposal. The Flight Test Community Organization also has a great video out there where they go over how to submit a comment. The Drone University, or Drone U, has worked with the FPV Freedom Coalition to create a drone advocacy kit, which is yet another great resource. So yeah, I suggest doing as much research as you possibly can And while you're doing this research, keep notes, and hopefully those notes will evolve and become the response that you submit to the FAA. A suggestion that I've heard from a lot of people is that we should try to make it personal. Tell the FAA who you are, why you fly, what you fly, and what it means to you. We want the FAA to, I don't know, maybe they'll sympathize with us, probably not, but we want them to know that we exist and what kind of flying we do exists. Let's just assume, say, the FAA only knows about camera drones by DJI, and you fly racing FPV drones. We want to make sure the FAA knows that this hobby's out there and how much that this remote ID proposal might affect that. Or say you're a disabled veteran and flying drones gives you temporary relief and allows you to forget about the world and just go fly. Let the FAA know that, and that their proposal would take that away from you. All right, so here's the final suggestion, which is actually the longest one. And it's a list of suggested topics that you might want to cover in your response to the FAA. Now, I don't think you should be copying and pasting these or taking this word for word. This is just sort of a list of things that are in the proposal that I think everyone should talk about. Now, you might not agree exactly with me exactly where, if you might not agree that, say, I say that broadcasting is fine for remote ID, or maybe you don't think remote ID should exist at all. But these are just some sort of topics to highlight, and make sure you discuss your thoughts, your opinions on these topics in your response. And in case you didn't think of all of these, so I want to make sure to put those all out there. So the first one of those is the amateur built. The NPRM talks a lot about if you build your own UAV, that you're basically stuck to a free location, or there's no way for a home built drone like a typical FPV or racing drone to ever comply with these remote ID regulations, because they have to be manufactured to the specifications from the FAA and get approval and get the serial number listed on the FAA's website, and that's going to cost probably thousands of dollars, and only large manufacturers are going to be able to do that. So there really is no reasonable way for us to build our own drone from parts like we do today. So that's a huge issue that we all need to make sure we say something about that in our comments. Another one is that there are some safety and privacy concerns. The Remote ID NPRM says that you should be broadcasting at all times the location of not only your drone, but you, the operator, where you are. And if anyone from the public can easily see where you are, that puts a lot of people in danger. And if you have any stories about that, be sure to share those in your comments. For example, a couple of years ago, I was out flying down by the river nearby, and some people who were sort of illegally camping and doing things they shouldn't be doing down there thought I was trying to spy on them. And had they known exactly where I was flying, they would have definitely come over to me and probably taken my equipment or stolen things or done something while I had my goggles on. Luckily, in that situation, I landed and I was packed up and walking away before they noticed me and sort of followed me to my car and everything. But things like that are a big issue, and I know a lot of people have had similar experiences where people have threatened them, and knowing exactly where you're flying from just makes that even worse. Another thing you should be talking about is registration. This remote ID proposal says that you need to register every single model you have that's over 250 grams, where today, if you're a recreational pilot, you only have to register yourself. Now, commercial pilots or Part 107 pilots do have to register every one of their drones, even if it's under 250 grams. But I would say we should definitely let the FAA know that it is not acceptable for us to spend $5 per UAS and register every single one of them. For some people who have dozens or hundreds of them, it's just absolutely unreasonable, and it doesn't really make any sense. So be sure to talk about your concerns about registering every single UAV you have. All right, next up, we have the FAA Recognized Identification Areas, or also known as FRIAs. So any UAV, UAS that does not have a remote ID compatibility will be limited to flying in one of these FAA approved locations. Now, we mostly talk about these locations as something like an AMA flying site. So the FAA has said a community-based organization will have 12 months after this proposal goes through to request that their flying field is approved as a FRIA. And then you can only fly in those locations for drones that don't have remote ID, or model aircraft that don't have remote ID, and all of that. And I don't know about you, but most FPV pilots don't want to fly in what a typical AMA flying field is like. That would get boring very quick. And I'm sure many AMA members don't want a whole huge influx of FPV pilots or other drone pilots inundating their fields. If you've got a camera drone, there's only so many times you can take a picture of the runway before it gets really boring. So we definitely have to let the FAA know that being stuck to FRIA sites is just not acceptable. And also the fact that you cannot request a new FRIA after 12 months, and that the FAA has said this is really just a temporary thing until all drones are remote ID compatible. That's just not acceptable. So be sure to tell the FAA something about this. Perhaps you could suggest a possible alternative to this, that maybe if they expanded the LANCE system to work in all airspace instead of just controlled airspace, say it would work in uncontrolled airspace too, then if you have a drone that does not have remote ID compatibility, you could launch an app on your phone and say, I'm flying in this location, draw a little box and say, I'm going to be flying here for the next hour. It would meet all the needs, I think, that the FAA needs to know about you and where you're flying. All right, on to the next one here. We've got cost. So in my case, I fly fairly inexpensive drones, and the added cost to manufacture a drone that would be compliant with remote ID could be a significant amount of the money of the drone. And I don't want to have to pay more just so that it can comply with these regulations. And the FAA also says that they expect everybody to subscribe to a USS, or a unmanned service supplier, and you'd be paying a monthly or yearly fee. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to pay a monthly fee just to go fly my drones in my backyard. So definitely let the FAA know that you're concerned that these proposed regulations would significantly increase the cost of this hobby and possibly price a lot of people right out of it. And that sort of brings up the next point of increased regulations stifle innovation and decrease participation. So I've noticed a lot of posts on Reddit, Facebook, and other websites that people are already concerned that they should not get into this hobby because of the regulations. So people are being scared to join. Some people are saying, oh, I'm just going to sell everything once this goes through. And if that happens, there will be fewer and fewer people in this hobby. And that means fewer and fewer companies can earn a living in the hobby. That means less and less innovation, less money put into research and development. And that's just going to kill it. It will slow down innovation. It will slow down progress. And I just see that as a very bad thing. It would probably shrink the hobby until it just disappeared altogether. So I suggest that you consider letting the FAA know that you're very concerned how this will negatively affect the hobby. Another thing to mention is the current safety record. Recreational flying of drones is one of the safest hobbies on the planet. Consider making a case that there's no reason for increased regulation on a hobby that has a proven track record of safety. The FPV Freedom Coalition acquired some data from a Freedom of Information Act request that showed that there were 14 confirmed UAS-related incidents in the period between 2013 and 2018. With these 14 confirmed incidents, there were no deaths, no crashes of manned aircraft. Using the FAA data, there are currently over 1.3 million recreational UAS in the United States. Recreational UAS use is proven to be extremely safe endeavor. We challenge the FAA to demonstrate why remote identification of UAS is required to ensure public safety and the safety of the airspace of the United States. You might also want to point out some of the inaccurate assumptions that are in the document. Say the FAA assumes 93% of Part 107 UAS and 20% of recreational UAS can be retrofit to comply with remote ID. But for a number of reasons, with the serial number requirements and the approvals on the FAA's website and the fact that you can't modify your existing drone to become compliant, there's just no way with a firmware update that the drones I fly are going to be able to be upgraded to be compliant. So definitely let the FAA know how many drones you own, how much they cost, and how much this would affect you to try to upgrade them. Basically, you're just going to have to throw them out and get all new ones. And that goes back into that other paragraph about how much this is going to cost and how much it'll affect you. So the FAA in the document says that the average UAS operator owns 2 aircraft with a lifespan of 10 years and an average cost of $313. So if that does not describe you, or you're not even close to that average, let the FAA know how many you have, how much they cost, and how long you use them for, to show that their assumptions are not correct. And they're using their assumptions to sort of justify a lot of what they're doing here. All right, here's a big one that a lot of people are quite upset by: internet connectivity. The NPRM requires that all standard remote ID UAS to only fly if they can send their remote ID information across the internet, severely limiting the locations you can operate. A standard remote ID UAS is allowed to fly without internet access, but only if internet access is unavailable in the location you're flying. So if it's okay to fly without internet access, if it's not available, then why require it at all? So if you've got other concerns about internet connectivity, definitely voice your concerns here. I have other concerns about that whole internet connectivity piece because they don't define it very well. Like, how do you actually define whether you have an internet connection at all? What if you have access to some of the internet but not all of the internet? How do you know? And it just gets really complicated. So good luck, FAA, trying to define that one. So while you're going through this document and you're writing things down and you're complaining about everything, the FAA really wants you to try to come up with solutions to some of the problems they have. And one of the solutions that I think everyone should talk about is shielded operations. So for example, in New Zealand, they have this rule called shielded operations where you're permitted to fly as long as you are flying sort of below the height of the trees, below the height of the nearest buildings. You're in no way a danger at all to any manned aircraft. So we should suggest that the FAA take a look at New Zealand's shielded operations, see how successful that has been, and maybe propose something similar here in the United States. And that if you are flying in a shielded operation, you shouldn't need remote ID because you're not doing anything unsafe. You're in no way a danger to manned aircraft. So if you're like me and most of your flights are done at low altitude, sort of in and around the trees or buildings, then tell the FAA that. Let them know that this would be a great solution to the problem. And finally, we're getting down here to the end. Let the FAA know that if this regulation passes as is, there will be mass amounts of non-compliance. Everybody I know would just ignore this regulation and continue to fly as we are now. If that's the case, then this proposal just basically fails, because right at the beginning of the proposal, they say we need everybody to comply with this for it to work, because they want to know at all times where every single drone, every single UAS is operating. And if nobody is complying with it, the FAA won't know where anybody is flying, and the whole thing just falls apart. So be sure to let the FAA know that. All right, at this point, you should be ready to submit your comment, and you can click on this page, comment now, and it will take you to the Federal Register. And up here, there is either that green button, or it'll hopefully take you to where that green button's already filled out or already clicked on, and you can type in your comment here. You can add your file, which should be your document you've been working on, fill out your information, and submit your comment. All right, so let's say you're done, you've submitted your comment, and you're wondering, what else can you possibly do to help fight this? Well, be sure to spread the word. Don't stop at just sending in this comment. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell everybody you know on Facebook. If you have a local hobby shop, stop by, talk to them, talk to everyone there, let them know, make sure they understand just how serious this is. Maybe they think, oh, no, I just fly a hand-built model at an AMA field, I'll be fine. Let them know why that's not necessarily a correct assumption either, and that this is really a big deal. Another thing you can do is join the UFDA crew's protest. On February 29th, 2020, the UFDA crew has organized a protest in Washington, D.C. And if you're interested in that, check out www.helpsaveourhobby.com for all of the details. And finally, the very last thing before I go is that you should also contact your representatives, especially if your state representatives are on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Let them know how concerned you are about this, and maybe, just maybe, they can make a difference. And the FPVFC website will have more information upcoming on how to contact your representatives and things you might want to tell them. All right. Well, hopefully I had some good video to go along with this really long suggestion guide. And thanks for taking the time to listen to me, and we'll talk to you again later.